All right. We're going to talk about behavior driven development. And it's something that as I was reading about it, I've never really I've heard you say in class like test driven development and whatnot, but I really didn't know what that was. Um so in this adventure to figure out what exactly behavior driven development is, I kind of figured out what test driven development is and kind of like a little bit what the differences are between them. But let's go ahead and check it out. So behavior driven development is basically it takes the ideas in test driven development and it combines, augments, and refines them along with acceptance testing. So like, let's see. So test driven development is essentially the way I read it was like you make a you have an idea of what you want to develop and then you make a unit test for it. And then after you code the tests for it, like you have the tests that you have made for it, then you code the software for it, and then you test it, and then you after you test it, then you go back and refactor it, and you do it rinse repeat over and over and over again until you've made a bunch of unit tests that basically equal up to the equivalent of a full piece of software. So that's the first part of this, the test driven development. And then what is a unit test though? So like I didn't know what a unit test was. A unit test is where you take one. I like to think of things in terms of methods because I feel like if a program's not doing anything, then it's not doing anything. Like a class is a class and it's a good way to store data, but if it's not doing anything with the data, it doesn't work. So, and I would say a unit test is testing a piece. I'd almost say like testing a method, but methods can be very large and they can be broken down into smaller methods that work together for one big method. But I would say that a unit test is where you take one piece, the word they like to use a lot is feature. So you take one feature of a piece of software and you test that one feature, and the only way it can pass. I don't know if this is back in the days of waterfall, that if and only if it passes all situations and exceptions, that then it passes the unit test. But that's what I read. But if it passes the unit test, then you have completed the unit test, and it's testing one feature within a whole piece of software. So like say like a website could just be the sign up feature. You just test to make sure that when you click the sign up button, you put in your information, that it sends you a confirmation email, and that if you're an administrator, you can check the database to ensure that there was a user account created for that sign up process, or an automatic login process after you signed up, so that way you can access the site immediately, something like that. The unit test is, but that's only the sign up. That has nothing to do with the rest of the website. It has nothing to do necessarily. It has partially to do with logging in, but if you separate login from signing up, then it's just the process of adding the account to the database through the sign up through the sign up feature. And if you tested that sign up feature, then that would be the unit test. So then refactoring is another part of test driven development, refactoring. So what is refactoring? And you can read this if you want. You just pause the video and read these. It's kind of funny. Maybe you find it funny, but what I kind of saw refactoring as was kind of like, I imagine it's the night before it's due. And you really want to get it done, so you write the code as fast as possible. And it's not pretty, it doesn't have proper or good standards of the coding world within it. And maybe that's my timer. Maybe You want to get it done as fast as possible. So you're cutting corners. You're not necessarily extracting methods from pieces in the software. So it's just one big blob of code. Say it's like 300, 400 lines of code, but it could easily be cut down to 100 lines of code. Or maybe you have it in one gigantic file, and instead you want to kind of, you know, separate it into different files. There's a word for it, I can't remember what it is. You want to separate into different files so that way it remains separate. So that way you can work on one piece of the software without having to work on the entire piece of code. And whenever you change one thing in one method, it's the same principle as automation with the, repeating the use of the methods. But then you want to make sure that the methods work together. And I don't even know if cohesion really belongs here or not. But organized classes, you make a class, you throw it together. When you're making a user account, you just make it with the username and password. Maybe you need a username, password, and email, so you have some way for them to reset it. Maybe you need username, password, email, and address, so that way you have some place to ship your product once they order from your e-commerce site. You have to go back and clean the data. You have to clean the code. I shouldn't say clean the data. Clean the code to make it, or I guess make it functional. I don't know how you'd say that, but I kind of imagine it as refactoring. You're writing it the night before, and it's just completely sloppy and it's terrible. But then a week afterwards, you just feel absolutely terrible about how terrible that code looked and how sloppy it was. So you go back and clean it up. That's what I kind of imagine refactoring as. So that's kind of test-driven development. It's emphasis on coding and testing, specifically where testing involves unit tests and when designing emphasizes refactoring. So I think what they're trying to say with the unit test is like with the unit test, you make one feature, but you don't necessarily make the entire piece of software within that one feature because, it's not like a humongous release. So you just make that one feature, and it's just like, your arm on a body or something. You don't make the entire body, but eventually you have to make the legs and the other arm. But each one that you make is like a separate unit test, and eventually you have your whole body. And refactoring is, well, when you first made the arm, it was kind of crooked. I don't know. So then you go back and clean it up, and as you do this process over and over and over, many unit tests and refactoring it to make it look better and better, and the coding is just part of both of those. Then that's test-driven development. Then what is behavior-driven development? So, behavior driven development is a combination of test driven development and acceptance testing. So, like, what is acceptance testing? And this is what they were calling it: the functional test, the acceptance test, the customer test. I have references at the end of this. I'll skip to the end of this presentation whenever, or maybe I'll link it in the comments on my YouTube, um, or the description. And it's the way I kind of felt that was is that acceptance testing. I don't. It didn't even really ring true to me that acceptance test was the same as the acceptance criteria. And when you're talking about software engineering, we've learned in class where acceptance criteria is what you accept for something being like a user story. It's kind of like the user story is the customer. So it's like the customer sits down and they're looking at it, and they're trying to use it, but it doesn't have functionality that they want it to have. So they want it to have a certain type of functionality. So then that's where you get the amplify feedback loops or whatnot. You constantly talk to the customer constantly talks to the development team constantly talks to the customer. They constantly talk until they both have the same idea in their head of what exactly it is that they're developing. And whenever they have that same idea developing, eventually you get something that the customer originally wanted, but the development team can now see the vision of what it is that they wanted them to design. So you have this idea of business and these things, and no piece of software is important enough for it to not be sold. I mean, how do you put that? No piece of software could not be sold practically as long as it does something useful. I guess that's really what it is. The company wants it to be useful, but they want it to be useful in their way. You know, what I mean, if it's useful and it's, I don't know, shipping eggs from Honduras to the United States, but you're a car salesman, might not be helpful. But that's acceptance testing. It's kind of like you want it, when you talk to the customer, if the customer doesn't accept it, then it's not really, you can do all the unit tests you want, but if it doesn't fit the customer's functionality for what kind of functionality they want, then um, it's not past the acceptance testing. So then all that wrapped together, and then it also talks about how this makes for simpler code, and I think that may just be a result of what exactly it is to have behavior driven development. So then again, we come back to the question, so what is behavior driven development? Because we've talked about all these other things, but we haven't exactly hit on what behavior driven development is. So it's a combination of acceptance testing and it's a combination of test driven development. But I read this and I thought it was really, really good. Behavior driven development is in the name. The driving inspiration for designing, coding, and testing the product comes from the intended behavior of the program. So, like I was saying before, if it's doing something that it's not supposed to be doing, or, even something like, you want an app on a phone, but they give you a website. Well, they could serve the same function as long as they do that, but it needs to have a certain behavior behind it. It needs to have multiple capability, or it needs to, whenever you click a button, it does this, or it's able to send you a confirmation. I don't know, but they have a certain behavior in mind. So I'd imagine I almost kind of look at it like this. In one of my earlier classes, we talked about how they developed the Java virtual machine and how it was kind of like the original .NET or whatever. It's like you code it in one environment and then it's able to be developed. It's able to be deployed to any, like, Android, iOS, Mac, Windows, Linux. You can deploy it to whatever because the .NET framework has the capability to deploy it to those different operating systems. So it's like they give you an example of something. They say, I want this functionality, but I want it for this. So, like, you want the functionality of JCPenney's website, but you want that same functionality for a car parts website. And maybe there's some different functions that they've seen on there, like where you choose the color of the socks, but instead you choose the powder coat for the rims that you're purchasing off the car parts website. That could be a tremendous difference in the type of behavior, and maybe it modifies the cost, and it could take more time. So then it says, well, this will affect shipping times or something like that. And, the customer has an intended behavior when they go into behavior driven development. I mean, the customer is not doing behavior driven development, but I'd assume that the development team has came up with this in a way, as a good methodology of practicing coding, and that they go and talk to the customer and say, "Well, what do you want it to do exactly? What is it you want it to do?" So you leap on that, and you use the principles of test-driven development. Unit test, refactoring, simplicity. Then you take acceptance testing. Is it what they want? You do the one feature at a time that meets the simplest way of solving the solution, with also being robust in its refactoring, and you get the intended behavior. So then part of it comes in, I believe that part of it comes from the communication between the customer and the manager and development team. So that way they can kind of converse, like say, like, they have to have the same thing in both of their heads, because the customer knows what he wants, but you have to be able to translate it to code. So you have to be able to develop that behavior that they're looking for. Then these are my references. I'll pause on for just a second. But that's kind of what I got from looking into behavior driven development. Is it really reminds me of a class I took, which was human computer interaction. And human computer interaction, one of the things that they were talking about was that you do user tests. Whenever you're doing a user test, it's you see how often where a user moves their eyes, or where they're moving their cursor on the screen, where they're clicking something, what makes it simplest for them to click. And that almost kind of makes me think of the same behavior type of development. You have, as a business owner, you kind of get a feeling for customers and how they behave, and you kind of know what your crowd is. So you want to develop something that's easy enough for them to use, also complicated enough to sell your product. And you want that perfect balance, but then you have that perfect balance in your head. You have to communicate it to the development team in order for them to develop that piece of software you have in mind. And that's kind of what I got out of behavior driven development. This is March 7th, 2023, 10:46 p.m. I'm cutting it close yet again. I always do. And thank you very, very much. Um, you're a great professor. Good job. Proud of you. I don't know. I'm just saying stuff now. Anyways, I don't know how to close out a video. See you next time.